Hello and welcome to the Euphoria Podcast. This is the start of playoffs, folks. It's Season 7, Episode 10. We're heading into playoffs round 1. I'm Drakos. That's Caedrel. Between us in his plastic prison,
Jail.
hashtag COVID safe, is the little jail. Bigger jail this time, though. It's none other than Ender. Ender, thank you for
Give him more room.
waking up early this morning.
Am I just on the podcast? Like, am I just a part of it? Is it a trio cast now? Like, what's going on?
To be honest, I don't know. The fans really like you. They're a big fan of the three of us
Nice.
having conversations, which is good because they're going to get more of it when we cast Fnatic versus SK this Friday.
Just becoming
Poggers.
more and more like the dive every week. Now we've got
More-
2 Americans on the show.
I love the
You're
comments from the
gone
last
next,
time.
Caedrel.
Last time shows like rename Euphoria to 2 Americans bully the Brits because of the amount of fish sauce I had to drink.
Man, it's so good.
We should rename it.
Okay, yeah. This is the bully power hour.
Yeah, bully for our
Help! Shut up, Caedrel. Just intermittently, just cut
Your
you
opinion
off.
doesn't
I don't care what you
matter.
have to say. How many times have you made playoffs? Shut up.
Drink
up.
some fish
Just
sauce.
actually bully you.
yeah.
Just be rude. Jesus.
Sad.
As always, we're available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and SoundCloud. Here's what's going to happen today. We reached out to you guys on Twitter and asked for a bunch of questions. So we're going to be answering your questions throughout the podcast. We're going to be mixing it in with some of the conversations that we're going to be happening. But it's playoffs time. So today, primarily, we're going to be talking about all 3 of our playoffs matchups. That's Fnatic versus SK, Schalke versus G2, and Rogue versus the Mad Lions. But before we do that, there's a lot of things coming into playoffs that are changing. Players in the studio, there's a new patch, players playing on stage, prepping for best of 5. There's a lot of little changes to look at. But before we even get into that, we had one question that's been coming up more and more that I wanted to talk about before we talk about playoffs proper, which is a lot of people, Zanzara kind of kicked this conversation off, and I think a lot of people are now following up on it, expanding the league, adding more teams. I would love to know how you guys feel about this as a concept. Obviously, our perspective is limited as people who don't work on the team business side of things. But I was just curious, how do you guys feel about more teams in the league, 10 versus 12 versus some people are even saying 14? What are your thoughts on expanding the league?
Well, yeah, like you said, talking it from a business standpoint is a bit difficult. So talking it from a player standpoint, obviously it brings more competitiveness to the league. That's quite obvious. I think the bottom teams would have more competition in a sense, and I guess you'd make it 8 teams go to playoffs in that case. If you had 12 teams, I'm not sure how it would work.
I mean, you
just
can
do 6.
pitch it to me. Yeah, like I don't really know.
Yeah, I don't know. If you have 8 teams going to playoffs, obviously the league is just stronger because you have more teams in the league, and that brings more innovation, more differences in picks, more differences in styles. So
Here's the question. With 8 teams going to playoffs in our 12 or 14 team league, does Excel make playoffs or they just get knocked down another rung? It's not even
I don't know. I'm not an Excel anymore.
You're not an Excel anymore.
It
You
doesn't
made
matter.
it to playoffs. You don't have to take this
Yeah.
personally.
No, yeah. Wow. Well, hope they make it. I'll be casting them. I'm going to make playoffs this week. Let's go.
Hey, if they get some place every time, 8 teams in.
I love it how
looking
every
good.
single E4, no matter what, an Excel meme comes out. No matter what.
It's the good meme. It's the gift that keeps on giving. Eventually, the gift I would think that the gift would stop giving and eventually they'd make playoffs, but it's a curse, dude.
Yeah, if they don't make a next split, the meme will never die. Anyway, 12 teams.
12
yeah,
teams.
I'd love it. Yeah.
Yeah,
What
'cause
do you think, Ender?
No, I mean, I think from like a player side of things, I think we definitely have the talent to fill out 10 more players on 2 extra teams inside the league. I think the biggest question is like how competitive can like 2 new orgs be with other orgs in the league? Because we've already seen like obviously like no team can really compete monetarily. It seems like with G2 and trying to like get like high level players like that and like stacking them up.
Well,
but like, can you compete with like the mid tier teams and trying to break into that? Because I don't think anyone wants 2 teams that are like just sort of like struggling to hang on. It's like we can only sign these rookie players. That doesn't really help anyone. You need 2 teams that have the funding, have the will to do that.
Yeah, and not knowing too much about that, I think the other big thing that the G2 has going for them is that they just have a world-class roster. So if one player leaves, everyone in our league wants to be on that team. Like I'm sure that if you're like Caedrel, if G2 said, we want you to play support, you'd be like,
Dude,
yes, why not? I would
also
learn a new role.
I would even play Nami for them if I had to. That's how badly I would want to join that team. But I think you're right. Like they have not only is it a star-studded roster, but like the brand is like being a part of G2. It's so prestigious. You're like, wow, look at me. I'm part of G2. It's like one of the best orgs in the world right now. So yeah, I think that it's really important to have like not only the player base, but also like the fan base behind you to give you that more like an extra boost in terms of brand to get your name out there, right? So I think the thing that I would see with 12 teams going a bit more businessy here is like if I'm 12th or 11th place, it's so hard to push my brand, right? No one really cares. The fan base might get spread out more because there's more teams, so it makes it a lot more harder to actually grow your brand, I guess, but also brings more competitiveness to the region, more talents, and more talented players can join. I think there's obviously 2 to 3 players in each role that could join the LEC right now in National League. So obviously the competitive side will get better. It's just a question of like the business side, the brand side, all these different things.
The broadcast side, I mean,
The
probably
broadcast
more broadcast
side.
days
Do we
for
go
us
to
too.
BO3? Do we go to BO2? Do we stay on BO1?
No, why? You got stop it,
You
please.
can't add more teams and then also BO3. That's
And what do you just
impossible.
want to cast every day? You're like, I've given up on streaming. Streaming is no longer good for me. I want to cast 6 days a week. We are the LPL now.
Yeah, LPL style.
No, I
Nope.
can't. I like look. There's on a personal level, I'll do what I have to. You know, I'm happy to fight for that paycheck. But
When do we bring in more casters?
Bring in more
That's the
casters.
question.
Yeah, more
Yeah.
teams, more
That's
casters,
what
more
they need.
games.
We need more
Ooh.
casters. We need
Bruh.
30 casters. That's what we need.
Yeah.
We just need
30 casters?
Because then we only
So
have
then
to
it's
cast
like
one game.
then it's like
split.
it's not a tricast, it's a pentacast.
the pentacast.
The
Like the
pentacast.
Korean cast where you just have 4 dudes shouting over each other. Oh, Faker!
I think I would be really good at just screaming player names, and that could be my only contribution.
Really? Wow,
Yeah.
you could be a
Dracos
play-by-play.
wouldn't though. Dracos wouldn't though. You know why?
Why?
Because he mistaked upset for reckless.
Oh my god.
No, dude.
I'm still getting messages, by the way. I post that thing on Twitter. I still get DMs on Instagram like, hey, buddy, I know you like to live in the past, but it might be time to move on. Like,
It's okay. I called Reckless Perks like 3 times in one game this year. So
Yeah, it's-
it was rough.
I always get the team names mixed up. And Mad Lions, wait, G2 in the fight. Oh,
Now imagine if you had 12 teams. Ooh.
bringing it back in, though, I think that for me, when I look back at last summer, when we had this really close playoffs race, or like the final season we had before we swapped to the LEC, where it was like that H2K neck and neck kind of race for playoffs, I always feel good about, yes, let's add more teams. But this split, Astralis and Vitality were like invisible all season,
Yeah.
right? We're like non-existent. And obviously, when we look at the last few weeks, you can go, but they turned it around. They really showed up. And it's if we have 2 more teams like that are going to struggle at the bottom of the standings, I want a situation where, yes, our league can be a little bit top heavy. I think is as expected with Rogue and G2 playing as well as they are. But I don't want a situation where we essentially have like 2 leagues of competition. We have like the bottom half, let's say 6 teams fighting each other, and the top 6 fighting each other. Because that's my biggest fear as the league gets bigger and bigger is that like if the skill gap actually just continues to widen, I think super top heavy leagues are really, really boring to watch.
Yeah.
So that's my biggest fear.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's why I think like we've both sort of said, or we've all said it, like the national leagues have enough talent to fill out more rosters, but that's where like I'm not worried at all about the players. I need to see like 2 organizations with like very proven track records already, like in the ERL system, that I know will be able to compete and like do better than that, and like one bad split here or there, that's totally fine, like obviously, but you need orgs that are gonna like commit and like work really hard to push themselves forward.
Yeah. And again, I'm not saying any of this is a league representative, so we'll see. It's hard for us to know the business side. Sustainability also very important, but
but I think pushing the spiciness is so important. Like if you look at G2, not only like we were talking about the players, but like the social side of things. They like make so many memes. They're really funny on social media, all this stuff. And like having 2 extra teams that can do that could make it more interesting in general. But I think you're right. The league just gets saturated to the point where the bottom half of the table is really boring to watch. No one really wants to watch it because of the skill gap difference when it's like the top 4 playing versus the bottom 4 when there's 12 teams. Whereas now there's like a balance of quantity and quality right now where it's like the bottom 2 teams, yes, they might be bad, but they can upset every now and then. Astralis had a few wins even though they were out. Vitality were trying to push for wins, but they couldn't find them.
Yeah.
And then you had the middle of the pack, like 4 teams fighting for one spot, which you love to see. Whereas if there was 12 teams, there could be most cases, if I'm not mistaken, I think most cases would be very little playoffs races. You'd have like 2 teams fighting for one spot, maybe like the last 8th spot, and then 2 or 3 or 4 teams which are just basically out. And then there wouldn't be as much excitement. I think the balance right now is really good from a fan perspective, from a viewer perspective. So I wouldn't want to see 12 teams personally, unless there's a huge format change on the entire league, because I think right now what we've got is working really well.
yeah, and I would be very sad to see our playoffs format change because I'm a very big fan of that. And speaking of playoffs, let's talk a little bit about kind of expectations coming in. The big thing that I think is on my mind that has been showing up in a ton of Twitter questions, shout out to everyone who submitted a question, is the environment change, is playing in the studios. So I have some assumptions, but in your guys' eyes, who are like the biggest winners and losers of playing on stage? And obviously this is like, guys, this is pseudoscience. I'm not going to lie to you. Like there's going to be a little bit of a track record and a little bit of evidence, but this is not like hard analysis. So if someone on here says this team's going to suffer, remember, take it with a grain of salt because it's all a bit of guesstimating. Emotional, like playing on stage and playing in the right mindset, I cannot ever say, I don't think anyone can say if like a player is going to be perfectly set up to succeed or will fail.
I think actually there's only 2 teams that benefit in this G2 Fnatic. And even then, Fnatic's sort of a stretch because we haven't seen their mid and bot, their new carries on stage, for example. Yes, Niski and Upset have played on stage a lot, but I think G2 is a clear benefactor. Fnatic is a question mark, but definitely will benefit with the players that they have. But if you look at every single other team, Rogue, Mad, SK, and Schalke, I think all of them actually don't benefit from this at all. Like you have Abadagi, who's been playing so well online, Rogue and Mad Lions, who went to Worlds and kind of on stage didn't go so well.
Mad Lions is the most obvious one.
Mad Lions is the most obvious
they have a
one.
history and a track record of and even Max said it in interviews coming out and saying that like the transition to stage did not do them any favors.
And even historically, Mad Lions, right? And then SK obviously rookies. So only 2 benefactors in my eyes.
Yeah, I think Mad Lions and Rogue, while a lot of people be like, oh, they went to Worlds, that was in person, and that was rough. Like, I think even just having that experience of recently playing on a stage is obviously going to be of some help to them. I think that Schalke is the team that I'm actually like quite concerned for. SK is like kind of an unknown factor for me, but if you look at Schalke last year, they were abysmal at the start of spring, right? When it was all in person, and then they went online, and all of a sudden, Apadage, like Scrim God is showing up, right? So obviously the pseudoscience is there, but like it seemed like everything lined up when they went home. They started winning more. It started looking a lot better for them. So that I'm a little hesitant on. And then for SK, I mean, obviously like Tinks, Blue, Jezu, these guys have never played on the LEC stage. I think Gen X had a little bit of time before going online. And then Treats, even when he was in NA before the pandemic, he was a cardboard cutout on stage.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, dude. No, but I think also speaking from my experience from transitioning, I did the whole year of 2019 was on stage, and a little bit of 2020 was on stage, and all of it, the rest was online. Like the difference is actually so noticeable as a player. It's crazy. The smallest of things, like waking up, having meetings before this thing, and then having like the pressure in the air, almost like, okay, you're going to the studio, okay, the cab's here, everyone gets ready to get in the taxi, you have your gear on, you're sitting backstage waiting an hour, talking about the game. Like it all feels way more high paced and intense than when you get on stage. Like it feels so much different. The air is thinner, like it's slightly colder. All these small things, slightly colder. You're not on your home setup. Do you take your shoes off? Do I leave my shoes on? Do I cross my legs when I sit? Like it's so hard to find comfort. Whereas when you're at home, everything just falls into a subconscious level where it's like, yeah, I'm ready to play. So I think it's actually a huge difference. If you're wondering if it's a big difference, it's actually pretty massive, I think.
So one thing I'm curious to get your opinion on specifically, Caedrel, is as someone who played in Challenger Series, as someone who played in regional leagues before there were regional leagues, and has played both in a gaming house and on stage and has done that transition. Is the transition it was Challenger in your time, is the transition from playing games at home to playing stage on Challenger, do you feel like that's actually a comparable example? Because I look at, we talk about Blue, no stage experience, but he did play in the TCL, right? Like this man has had a chance, like he's going to get those chances. Tinks has played a lot on the EU Masters stage, right? So they have stage games and stage experience, but is that actually, can you actually say that that's the same thing? Or in your experience, is there like a different level when you enter LEC? There's like a different amount of pressure.
From what I can remember, for things like the Challenger Series stage and TCL stage, stuff like this, in the regular split, I think that it's not going to be too much of a difference right now, just for one reason, that's the crowd. Like the crowd not being there is actually going to make it very similar. And the crowd actually made it even more stressful, right? Because there's people actually just looking at you while you're playing. It's like a weird feeling, but actually having people right in front of you who are just watching you play, even though it sounds weird, it feels kind of weird every now and then. It's really easy to get adjusted to. It took me like a week or two to be like, okay, I don't really care anymore. But that small factor kind of changes it, I think, whereas studios like the TCL, playing online, there's not many people watching you and there's no crowd. So I think that the fact that there's no crowd actually helps a lot. And for example, for me, I've played on decently big stages, not huge ones, not like, I don't know, Madison Square Garden or like the World's Finals or anything like this. But I can imagine a huge crowd obviously is a little more different to a smaller crowd, just from people like screaming. You can slightly hear them through the microphones, like the mumbling and all the rumbling and stuff like this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think crowd makes a difference. So I think it will be pretty similar for Blue and stuff.
That's good. I mean, that's a positive look overall. And I think across the board, I'm hoping that we don't see too many changes, because I think that is the most disappointing way to go out of playoffs, and would be the most disappointing way for us to watch these series, is to spend an entire season like, wow, this guy is so good, and then they show up on LAN and they kind of choke on LAN, right? Like that feels bad as a spectator. It feels bad as a player. It probably feels bad as your opponent. You like prep all this stuff, and like, let's say Abadage is a guy who's going to struggle. He goes from Faker Dage to just like chilling. Like that has to be such a bad feeling.
The one thing that I don't think we can ever prove, and like we can talk to players and get their POV, is like, if someone were to come out and like hugely underperform, is it choking because it's LAN, or is it choking because it's a best of 5 and like their entire season
for
split is
sure.
on the line, right? Like that's where I've always personally I've hated these conversations of like online versus stage play and this stuff, because it's like, while it is a relevant factor, I can't get into the mind of a pro player in that. So like I can
for
try to
sure.
think like, what is a pro player thinking when they flash forward in a team fight? But I can't tell you like, wow, he had bad breakfast this morning,
True.
and he didn't he got 7.5 hours of sleep instead of the usual 8, right? Like it's tough.
It's for sure like that's like the difficulty of these discussions in general,
Yeah.
right? It's like on the one hand, it does matter and it can be super impactful, but two, like it's unfair to the players in cast especially to speculate. Like I'm not going to show up and be like like let's say we were casting Chalk, I wouldn't be like Abadage really choking because land. Like I can bring up that hey, Abadage has struggled on land, but like I think if anyone wants to make any kind of definitive statement based on this stuff, that's where it gets like real. Unless you are that team's mental performance coach or you are like living with that player day in day out and you like know the signs of like tilt or whatever that you see from this player, then like if anyone wants to be like well absolutely just choked on land, like you
I think
cannot
there's
say that
like
with
the story
confidence.
you can lead with that is obviously the history of 2020, right? At the start it was bad, then they went online and it looked good.
Yeah.
What happens today? The question, and then oh man, after the series. Well, you know what? Just like at the start of 2020 when they were playing on land, they just looked terrible.
But it's going to be my call.
But I think that's the cool thing about how leagues evolved, right? Nowadays, you have these performance managers that will help you with your mindset and getting on stage. And I think what you said is completely true. Like, you can't really relate from a caster point of view whether their performance is based on a personal thing, what they had for breakfast, how they're feeling, if they're sick, if they're cold, the room's not warm enough, then whatever it may be. These things are things that the player is conscious of, which I'm sure of because I've been through this. These are things you actually think about as a player, but it's not things you put too much tension into. Like playing on stage, you're like, yeah, okay, I'll try to get adjusted to it. Yeah, okay, I like having this breakfast. It gives me more energy. These are things that do affect your performance, but they're to do with more of a personal level and what your coach and your performance coach actually think benefits you most. Like if you're bad with caffeine, for example, then coffee's not the go-to because it makes you start to shake. And when you play on stage, you're a bit shaky. So you want to do like, I don't know, sugary drinks instead, or maybe eating fruits before a game, bananas. So finding this balance is more of a personal thing, but it does help.
But just imagine like it's like world finals, right? Like G2's there and we're really worried about them getting 3-0. And we're like, we made a documentary and we followed G2 for a week and we learned like every factor. And so we come into the podcast and people at home are like, we want to hear about the gameplay. We're like, screw the gameplay. Like Yankos, he needs his Wheaties. All right. He needs a shot of espresso, but not too much. And it has to be organic. Has to be organic. And then the second Yankos insert all, we're like, at grabs, you didn't get him the organic espresso, did you? He couldn't play. It was unplayable.
They come back from the shop. They're out of it.
Yeah,
oh my God.
This is what analysis
they don't have any more of the coffee.
Years.
The crazy thing is that you guys are joking about this, but I can confirm all of this I have experienced as a referee. Like the temperature on, I've been told all the time, like it's too cold here. Can you ask them to increase the temperature? I'm like, production, is it possible to increase the temperature on stage? Literally something they can do, by the way, has been done. The bananas before game, big thing. People love their bananas
potassium
before a game.
People
potassium,
like caffeine,
calm
Red
you
Bull,
down,
all this stuff.
everything. Yeah, I remember like C9 would always like come with like their like super, they would, I don't know if they went to like Starbucks or something, but they went to like some very specific place to get their coffee because they couldn't just have the studio coffee.
Which is fair. The studio coffee's pretty booty.
Yeah. And this all ties in back to like the home versus stage. Like at home, you're comfortable, everything's fine, there's no distractions. But for example, if I go on stage and there's no more Red Bulls left and I like to drink Red Bull for the game, then it's already distracted me. I don't have a Red Bull. Now I already feel uncomfortable about the game because I haven't done my routine, right? A routine is what builds you up to the game. And when you're at home, the routine is so easy. You crawl out of bed, shower, get your breakfast, your little Wheaties, like you were saying, and then you just go to your PC and your slippers. Whereas going on stage, you need to make sure you have everything, you've not forgotten anything.
You gotta be dressed.
You gotta be dressed.
You have to wear pants. It's a lot of
But
pressure.
it was literally like, it was very similar. I'm sure you can relate to this, like casting and going online too, where, usually you come in like 5 hours before show start, you get makeup, rehearsal and everything. And then I'm online, all of a sudden it's like, well, I guess I watched Netflix for 5 hours before going live. I don't know what else to do.
Final note before we move on to the next section here. Big shout out to the LCS casters who continue to cast from home because I am booty as a caster from home. And the fact that they have managed to transition that and still have good casts continues to impress me.
And also, congrats being back in studio Dash at least.
Dash at least. That's one at a time.
The new studio is cool.
Yeah.
The new studio is cool. Hype. Shout out LCS and all of our European pros there. They're currently playing their playoffs. Some hype matches for sure. But next question. Before we get into the discussions proper, don't worry, that is coming up next. We'll kick off with Fnatic SK. But before that, Swedish Corgi at Roast Limpo 1 wants to know, do you think we'll see any picks rise or fall in priority for playoffs compared to the end of the regular season? Playoffs patch is 11.6, and there are a lot of small changes coming in, but a lot of changes that are hitting top level kind of pro champions, mostly the Gnar, a little bit to the Hecarim, Renekton also seeing a hit, Lily also seeing a hit. Like, do you guys, looking at this patch on paper, I know it's a lot of small changes, but sometimes that leads to big things. Do you expect to see any significant like shift in pick ban prio?
I don't think there'll be too much of a shift. I think the biggest ones for me is Azir will fall off a little bit, so we'll probably see more Syndra or Orianna. And as a jungler myself, I think that Hecarim nerfs don't do much. Lilia nerfs, even though they did nerf her ult, it doesn't do too much either because Lilia's presence wasn't that high already. It was Udyr, Hecarim, and Nidalee already, so and a little bit of Olaf. So I think the Hecarim nerf is also not that big. The cool thing about jungle is the Gromp XP and the Smite buffs, which are really cool. And for me, if you're expecting
20 HP, just feeling great after that.
It's just a QOL kind of thing, it just feels good. But if you're asking me if there's going to be something that's going to rise up, I think Volibear jungle could be coming back. I think Volibear jungle buffs, I've tried it actually a lot in solo queue recently. It feels pretty good to me. I think this champ could come definitely back into the meta, but I think the AP item buffs, and like you said, the Stridebreaker nerfs might make room for more change, but I wouldn't expect it too much. Just, you have to think of the pro players, right? They've been screaming on this patch for maybe like a week, or maybe a week and a half, so they have to figure out what the most OP champs are, and it actually takes a lot of time to dissect the patch.
Yeah, I think with like the Stridebreaker nerf, some hits like Renekton Gnar as well. I wonder if we see sharper champions show up in the top lane. And what I mean by that is, like, if you look at Renekton Gnar, they're both sort of like tanky dudes, decent enough.
They kind of do a lot of things.
They do a lot of things pretty well, right? But if they start to fall off, like, I think like Sion's really good and like obviously like does like the tank thing like super well, probably the best tank you can run in the top lane at the moment. But do we then see sharp like split push type champions like a Camille pop in, something that is a little bit more feast or famine compared to like Renekton, something like that? Like, these are the types of directions I could see us going in top lane and making compositions feel more unique in a way. And to me, that is potentially exciting. And obviously, I think it would be something that we ease into a bit, but I think champions that are sort of like jack of all trades lead to pretty boring games to watch and like less stakes on every individual moment.
Now, the Gnar nerfs, keep in mind, it's just his W passive and it's just 10 damage, but it will matter. On top of Stridebreaker nerfs, right? On top of some adjustments to not Jarmsfish, Sterix. Thank you, Sterix as well. Like, maybe it's enough. Because I actually like Gnar as a champion a lot. I think it's a super cool champion, great identity. How he ever hits an ult in pro play is beyond me, but he manages to, which is super hype. But I'm over it. Like, I am so over blind pick Gnar. It's so boring to me. I do not want to see any more Gnar into Scions.
Blind pick Sion only. That's what I want.
That's fine. Blind pick Sion's fine.
But I think the cool thing is, if you look at like 11.4, 11.5 as the patch progressed, you could see the final weeks of this patch. Things like Karthus Nocturne became OP. The AD solo laners with the AP junglers were the meta kind of, right? So, but Lilia being nerfed a little bit, Renekton and Gnar being nerfed with the item changes and the ult on Renekton as well, the Gnar buff, the nerf on the W as well. So the AD AP is going to be harder to run, especially with the AP item buffs for mages in mid. So things like Syndra Orianna have a more easy way to get to the late game scaling items on Void Staff and Rabadon. So I think the biggest changes you'll see are on the top side of the map. I think bot lane will be the same. I think things to expect are more scaling top laners, like you said, Camille, Jax perhaps, more tanks in top. I think Volibear could come up to priority. And then I think for mid, just expect more mages perhaps.
Yeah, and I think that, again, I feel like top lane often has like trickle-down effects to other roles. So like, especially like if we see like more Sion taking off in top lane, if people are like, oh, how do we match this? Like, do we need an Ornn up there to go into it to like have like strong team fight presence? Like, that could eventually lead into things like, maybe a Jinx coming, or like these more like hyper-scaling type bot laners being a little bit more popular than like the Kaisas we've got right now, perhaps.
It's bad because I feel like I've traded out one form of evil for another form of evil, because the two things I hate more than anything are like stale matchups where it's just like a Azir Victor forever, or like Gnar into whatever forever, and then the thing that I hate even more than that, flashback to, I think it was like early 2018 team fight meta, where it was Sion Maokai, Sion Maokai top every game, scaling
Tristana,
80 carry,
Jinx,
every team fight. The only person you need to watch is the 80 carry, even though it's whoever frontlines first dies first loses. You're describing that meta to me, so I'm very sad.
No. Okay, so if that happens, that'll be a slow trickle towards that direction. But I also, call me crazy, but this is what I like most about League, is that you'll see like the meta like develop like this over a long period of time. Because like, I honestly like, I love, heavy skirmish fighting all the time, and that gets fun.
Yes.
But I also want to see a boring front-to-back team fight every once in a while. Like that's a really that's a very
But you're so much
interesting
different to
dynamic to
Drakos.
play
Like,
out.
Drakos wants to see Yasuo Yone in mid
Yeah,
one.
I wanna
Yeah,
see
no,
Yasuo
I want to
Yone
see that
every
too.
time, every
I want to
second.
see that too. But if I get a month of Yasuo Yone, then I want a month of Ornn Sion.
You want to see pentakills from Jinx and stuff like this.
Yeah. Or maybe just like a week or two of that. But
Yeah.
like,
Oh,
I need diversity.
Yeah, but just to round out the patch in general, there's all the small changes like the shield bow changes, the shield bow nerfs and changes, the TP
It
buffs,
rips
whatever
Samira,
it
by
was.
the way. Like, Samira just keeps taking
Yeah.
hits, losing that lifesteal for all the
100%.
price. Samira
Yeah.
is just the
Good.
loser for every change.
And also, like Ravenous Hunter was like the biggest rune on
Oh, for
pros
sure.
that got slightly nerfed on things. Every single champ almost ran Ravenous Hunter. So there's all these small changes which could lead to bigger things. It's just so hard to tell without actually scrimming and actually dissecting the patch as much with loads of weeks and time into it.
And by the way, if you guys haven't seen yet, Viego still disabled for LEC,
Yeah.
so don't expect that.
Rip.
Big rip.
I love
massive
Diego.
bugs.
It's so cool though. I love it.
I saw the infinite. He does the infinite AP bug is the one I saw most recently, where he
Yeah.
one shots literally every tower in
Look,
the game.
they don't call him the Ruin King for nothing. Like, just ruined.
He absolutely ruined.
Is this the
right.
most buggy champ in the game? I think it is, and historically ever.
I mean, historically ever, like there are champions that have like thousands of bugs. They're just like, it's not
Pre-rework
that bad. But as far
Mordekaiser.
as like game-breaking bugs, this is one of the worst, I would say.
Oh,
And
I
the-
wanted to see him
the
on stage.
experience.
I mean,
Balance
Silas
tester.
switching to Shyvana and then not having mana for the rest of the game was kind of rough. Not being able to cast abilities, those were good times.
How boring is that? You're just sitting there with no mana. Unplayable.
Oh,
Completely
man.
unplayable.
At auto-attacking Silas at minute 30. Oh no, guys, run.
Oh man, Silas at minute 30 already a little rough. All right, Fnatic versus SK. Let's get into the matchups
El
proper.
Clasico.
El Clasico.
Please stop. Guys, it hasn't been El Clasico for years. Like, Trevor was around, and none of us cast League of Legends in that time. None of us can call it El Clasico. If you've been around since
I don't
then,
even know if I played League of Legends when El Clasico
I
was a
did.
thing.
But this is, so for context, this is Fnatic have never played a best of 5 versus SK since the start of the LEC. That's just 2019, 2020, and now 2021. So not a huge period of time, but this is an interesting matchup. Now, I want to go first to a Twitter question to kick off our conversation, because we had one very big fan of the podcast reach out, and SK Genax at Genax_law. What does SK have to do in order to beat Fnatic? Asking for a friend.
Just win your lane's forehead.
But
Just kill their
okay,
nexus.
for sure. But like, is this, when we look at this, I think a lot of people are going to be immediately super Fnatic favorite in this. Some of that's going to be history, some of that's going to be pedigree, some of that's going to be the fact that SK was really struggling in the final weeks. That said, Fnatic also, it was a rough final week. So what's your guys' read on this matchup?
Well, I think that the reason that so ultimately I think Fnatic will crush this matchup. And the reason I believe that it's this way is because when you look at the best element of SK, it is their bot lane, for sure. And then you look at Fnatic's bot lane and like the amount of just pure obliteration they've done through the LEC, like SK win games when their bot lane is getting ahead either through 2v2 or bringing jungle involvement, like making the bot lane very explosive. And that's like their best play style. They don't really play towards top side in the early laning phase at all. Blue just sort of, does his job in mid lane. But I don't think they'll be able to break the Fnatic bot lane. And if you're not breaking the enemy bot lane as SK, opening up the map to allow treats to impact the rest, I just don't see a world where SK get to play the game plan that they're so good at. And yeah, I just think that Fnatic are too strong on the bottom side of the map for that to happen.
Yeah, and if I think of SK just throughout the regular split, every single game that they win, it feels like the start of the game they're losing in a way. It's like the only way they make the game winnable just by the clutch factor of the engages or the team fights, which is always a good thing if you're winning fights, but finding the leads is important. I think you're right. I think Fnatic is almost like SK's Kryptonite in a sense, where their bot lane is just winning and they have the most 2v2 kills in the league. And their only win condition for SK is bot lane in a sense, because I feel like the rest of them don't really show up. I think that the SK is so easy to shut down in the pick ban. I think if you take away things like TF, Thresh, and then first rotate a support like Rel or Alistar, and then you have an all-in bot like a Tristana lane, then it's really hard for SK to play. They can't really pick Kalista into Tristana lane. It might be too hard, might be too volatile.
Yeah.
Selfmade can sacrifice himself and be bot side. So yeah, I'm definitely favoring Fnatic in this matchup. I think SK for me hasn't been so impressive when it comes to being diverse. I think that they've been really one-dimensional in the way that they win games. So yeah, I think they might struggle unless it's been loads of time to practice, 2 weeks to scrim. Maybe they've got something new.
And statistically, SK are looking like the weakest team that has made it into playoffs, right? They are the only team with a deficit on average of both 10 and 15 minutes. They're not huge, but they are deficits. Schalke has one at 10, but actually has an okay size lead at 15. And when you look at it, you talk about those very specific picks, and like Jesuan Kalista, 9-1-4 over the course of the season, 15 minutes, he has 3.3K plus A. Like when he's playing Kalista, and they get to pop off and he acts as an extra skate for treats, like they look so good. They look so dominant. That's where most of their explosive early games come from. But like you compare that to Jin, which is the only other 80 carry he has 3 games on, and he's quiet. He's doing very, 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 very little. And also treats is much quieter comparatively because he doesn't have that Kalista to back him up, to follow him, to gain pretty much automatic lane priority. So if I'm SK, I'm sweating right now because there's no simple way out of this. And what worked for them in the regular season, going through bot lane, we've already talked about, clearly will not work against Fnatic, short of, some really grief moments from Illisang, to be frank.
Yeah, and I think like both those points are super valid too, because you sort of saw like SK's draft priorities shift a little bit towards the end of the season, where it was a lot more of the Jhin, and they had way less explosive 2v2s in the bot lane. And also like even looking deeper at the team stats of being behind at 10 and 15 minutes, like individually, each player was behind at 15 minutes too from the digging I did last night, which tells like it's not even like, they have like bot lane is like super popping off in the majority of their games or something like this. Like one of their biggest strengths was their bot lane, but also their team fighting. Like thought like even from deficits, SK's team fighting, and specifically the way that I thought Treats and Genax both operated together within fights was really, really solid. But I don't, that's not enough for me to have faith in them coming in here.
You also have to remember, like, and not to throw too much shade here, because again, I think that SK, like, I want to see SK shift and turn things around, but Bwipo's highlight Riven game, where he absolutely monstered a team, absolutely monstered, was against Genax on Vladimir. Now, I don't think we're ever going to see that matchup again, but like the fact that ever happened at all this season is like going to be a thorn in the side of SK, because it's like, it's game 2, you're down 0-2, you're like, all right, guys, the mental's still strong, we're good. And then Bwipo locks in Riven. And it's like, shout out to SK. If you can keep the mental strong when you're down 0-2 and game 3, Bwipo locks in Riven, like, good on you. But I couldn't. I would break. I would just instantly be like, all right, I'm out. This is it. I'm done.
Yeah. And I think that these two teams are almost identical to each other. You have like the really aggressive bot lanes, you have the farming junglers in a sense, mid lanes are more supportive, things like TF scaling mid, and then top lane is just like Renekton, Volibear, Gragas, which I think both of them have the most played on as well. So I think that SK is like Fnatic light in a sense, but I think that the way SK wins is obviously Fnatic's weakness, what their crutch is, what's holding them back, and what's making them lose games, which is fighting too much. Like Fnatic take way too many fights. It's way too many unnecessary fights. They take way too many unnecessary dives. So if I'm SK in this matchup, I would pick more of a scaling approach, more of an XL approach in a sense. Not too much scaling, a little bit of early game on the support, obviously engage supports, make bot lane volatile, and then pick a more of a impactful jungle in the early game, which is very standard right now, and then let Fnatic play into you a little bit. If you have the aggressive plays and you can go for dives, go for them. But I think Fnatic might overreach, overstep, go for an aggressive dive, and they might ace themselves in a way. So I think Fnatic are their worst enemy in this matchup. So SK should just try to take advantage of that, not to overforce plays, but let them come into them and then just capitalize on the mistakes.
So then this is interesting, because I initially looked at stats for the junglers, and I was very concerned because Tinks is one of the lowest when it comes to the stats that I value for early game impact, which is K plus A at 15. But he's also very, very high in jungle proximity, meaning he's spending a lot of time around his lanes, even if it's not transitioning into kills. And normally I would look at that as a very bad thing. But if his job is to go, okay, Fnatic, where are you going to push too far? Where are you going to overextend? The fact that he is willing to spend a ton of time around his lanes without necessarily sacrificing himself too much, even if it doesn't convert to kills, is good. Because then maybe he's just, counter gank duty, be where he needs to be. If he can actually track self-made and keep up, maybe he can just be like kind of just the int police, to be honest. Just like, all right, where are you guys going to overextend? Where are you going to get too confident? Where are you going to force a play that you shouldn't force? And I don't think it's unreasonable to assume that Fnatic, even in playoffs, are a team that are going to overforce plays.
Yeah, and I think that there's two ways SK can approach this against Fnatic, like I said, because Fnatic overforcing plays, and then the early game jungle stats for things, jungle proximity is good. I would expect that to be around mid a lot from what I see. Things really likes to be around mid, not so much around bot lane. But I think that there's two approaches here if you're SK. Either you pick things like Azir and you go for scaling, where Azir is kind of out, more control made is wave clear, or you pick things like, I think what Blue had success on was things like Ryze and LeBlanc, and then just try to play volatile mid, volatile bot, and play heavy jungle into mid bot side, and then try to play like mid jungle winning 2v2 into bot, and whoever gets the bot first wins. And then you can play against Fnatic on their own game, or you play to make them wait for them to make mistakes. So I would say wait for them to make mistakes, honestly, because Fnatic always do it. But yeah, I think the winning mid jungle is kind of necessary against this team, because I don't know. I'm 100% sure TF is the biggest champion in this series. I'm sure of it.
I mean, it'll be banned every game.
Yeah, for 100% for sure. Yeah,
I think it's gonna be banned through playoffs. Personally,
I would kind of hope so. The champion is gold card plus global is just
well,
really broken.
You say that, but I've seen some blue cards and I've seen some red cards.
but blue card does so much damage now.
Yeah,
Caedrel.
come on.
True.
Shout out to Reggie. Reggie. Wow, this is. I think it feels very doom and gloom. But also on the other hand, the other thing to consider with Fnatic is that like there are two teams that can play League of Legends well at a. They can play League of Legends. I'm not gonna say well for Fnatic. They've been struggling a little bit this season. They can play League of Legends at like breakneck speed, and that is G2 and Fnatic from what we've seen. Now Rogue, I think their only weakness as a top team is the fact that sometimes they cannot keep up, but mostly I think they're there too. But like SK, if it turn into like, all right, screw it, volatile ass, super individually mechanically demanding like lane matchups, let's go. And then Fnatic is like instantly TPing bot lane or TPing top lane or like roaming to make a play and just forcing. Like, yeah, there's going to be a situation where SK are going to get some punches off, but I don't know. I still favor like if Fnatic flip the coin enough times, I think it is in their favor in this matchup.
Yeah. I think when you're sort of like examining a lot of the matchups, like I just almost have to favor Fnatic on paper. And I think like SK, I think Caedrel, you've given like a lot of really good ways for them to, like their best sort of mindset coming into this series. But I also think like if you look at how Fnatic try to play the game, apart from like the mindless, or not necessarily mindless, but like all the time fighting,
very high risk
turret diving at times. Like a lot of that is going to come through Niski Roman, like on stuff like the TF, but even like deeper than that. So I think that in terms of like how Fnatic play the map and a lot of their aggressive plays, like we talked about a lot, like last year, Selfmade, the more like farming style of champion, like they're going to be super aggressive either when TPs are off cooldown or when Niski is moving somewhere with Selfmade to like capitalize on a building wave ready to crash. So these are the types of things that they just need to be looking out for. And I agree. I think like playing into Fnatic and like letting Fnatic make the first move often is going to be the right course of action. And I think that's how SK do largely play outside of treats or capitalizing around volatile bot lanes.
So here's the question, and a lot of people ask this as well. Abinish Vel at Vel_Abinish, and apologies again, I'm going to butcher your name. Asked, do you think Fnatic's going to be able to cope given the conditions they were in during last week? This is the kind of the other discussion I want to have, is that specifically Abinish brings up, it seems their tent is good aggressive play. The execution, though, he says is very far from good. Like we saw how many fumbled tower dives. Now, I'm inclined to believe that if you didn't know, by the way, I'm sorry, I'm all over the place. They came out and basically said that for the past week of playing, someone had caught Corona. The team like had a lot of sick players in their final week, and now it's been enough time that they're through the period, right? And all the players should be feeling better, but I haven't had Corona. I don't know what that recovery is like. I don't know how that affects your mental. I know that it can be very difficult for people, even if they aren't in the risk age range. And I'm curious, how much do you guys expect from Fnatic? Like, is it just cleaning up little bits that you saw from the regular season, or do you expect to see like a dramatic shift coming into playoffs at the level that Fnatic's going to perform at?
Oh, it's so hard to say because Fnatic have had so many high highs and low lows. That's the problem with Fnatic. They're on either end of the spectrum depending on how the game progresses. And then if they're on the low side of things, and they just keep hammering it in until they can try and find a win, which I respect. I think Fnatic's playstyle, although sometimes it looks disgustingly int, it's actually good what they're doing sometimes. Like non-stop fighting can always be a good thing, especially if you're a team that's always committed to the fights, because it always catches the enemy team off guard. Yeah. I mean, when I played against Fnatic even last year, I was like, okay, there's no way they're going to fight this Drake. Okay, they're fighting this Drake. And then it just turned into a fist fight, and somehow they win it. So I wouldn't be able to talk too much about the recovery stages and the personal things that they've had going on and stuff like this, because I don't know too much about what was going on, who had Corona, what they were doing, whether isolating, splitting up, playing from home, whatever it was. I think that the easiest thing to say about Fnatic is halfway through the split, they found the form. Towards the end of the split, they lost the form. And I think that the fact that they're playing over-aggressive is always a form that I've said multiple times. Playing over-aggressive is playing more overly passive. Like SK is quite a passive team. XL was quite a passive team. It's so hard to inject aggression. Whereas Fnatic have had like too many injections of aggression. They're all pumped up. They're like red-eyed. They're like blood coming out of the mouth. They're ready to fight no matter what. So just giving them a chill pill, saying, guys, you can play scaling. Let's take smart
You're a really
fights.
big
Let's be
advocate for
more
just
cerebral.
drugging players, is what I've learned. You're like, all right, we got a little caffeine for you. We're gonna give you the I don't know
Some bananas for you.
Yeah. We got the Ritalin for you over here. And we got the caffeine for you.
Yeah, of course. Just get the aggression.
Just get that
I'm
cocktail
a big
going.
fan of aggression. I love just fighting all the time. So I think that there's a much easier way. I think Fnatic have it way easier than other teams where it's like, just tone it down a little bit. Come on, guys. This tower dive, there's 4 people on that tower and you're only like 3 and you're diving them. Like, guys, let's count to 4 here. Let's relax.
Deep
Back
breath.
off. Push the
Deep
wave.
breath.
And then
If it's
just
still
keep our,
playing
keep our
2
lead.
seconds, you can make
Yeah.
the play. 1, 2,
It-
long
it's
counts.
it's interesting to me though, because I don't know if they would be the team to be like, hey, it's playoffs now, like we're going to tone it down, or like these are the things we have to keep in mind. And I haven't spoken with Yamato about like any sort of direction they have in particular in playoffs. They do have 2 weeks, so if they wanted to do some like course adjustment, obviously they're not going to like completely overhaul anything. They could, but they also said very early on in the season, they're very vocal on Twitter, like, hey, we're going to play the aggressive style. We actually are happy, like we don't care that we're really making mistakes and going for bad fights. This is the way we play. So it's entirely possible that nothing changes, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing for them. Does mean that might not be the cleanest series at times, might mean they drop a game, but ultimately, like I do feel like they are the stronger team regardless of how they come in, barring they just like completely spin out after the first game.
And while we do have to remember for every team, it's been 2 weeks. So much can
Yeah,
change. We
100%.
talked about it like from when it comes to prepping for Worlds, when it comes to prepping for playoffs, big international tournaments, like massive changes happen when you give a team extra time to look back at their games, because the week turnaround cycle in League of Legends is brutal. You saw it a little bit in the Schalke documentary last week. It's very hard to keep up with that schedule. When you have a little bit more of a break, teams can make massive changes. That said, what is this 3-0? I want to get some like final predictions out here from this series, because it seems like everyone's leaning towards Fnatic, but like how dominant are we talking here?
I think it'll be a 3-0 for Fnatic. And just to reiterate my point, I think that the ease of fix is quite easy. When I hear Fnatic's voice comms, all I hear is, can we fight this? They always can we positive, like let's fight. I think they just have to.
I'm surprised they even ask.
Yeah, I'm surprised they even ask as well. But all they have to do is add one more step behind it, and it's like, what do we get for fighting this? Is it a net positive or a net negative? Are we losing waves? Are we gonna get their sums? Do we have a good setup? So I think the what is just a question that they have to inject. Like, what do we get from this? And if they can do that, I think that they'll find more fluidity in their decision making in terms of fighting. So yeah, I think Fnatic 2 weeks of practice. I think that they're looking like the much stronger team. I would be surprised if SK win. And if SK do win, then damn, good job to them. But I think Fnatic best of 5. Yeah, I think they'll take it 3-0.
It's a nine game weekend.
It's a 9-game weekend.
nine-game
Spoilers
weekend.
for the predictions coming up.
We're going to make
Scripted.
some dinner plans. I mean, don't, because obviously, but order in.
Wonder's gonna make his raids every night if he's watching the games.
Yep.
Yeah. That's more interesting in other matchups than it is in this matchup. But I think that, again, if you are an SK fan and they do pull off the upset, like, call us out for sure. But like they will have to dig deep and show us something that we have never seen before, which I'm excited, which always can happen in playoffs. Or alternatively, Fnatic will have to show us something that we have seen before, which is a little bit of running it, some of those tower dives ad nauseum until the series is over. And sadly, on paper, both teams come in at the form that we've seen, the best side of their form that we've seen in regular season. I agree. I think it's very clearly a Fnatic win.
And worth pointing out that it is single elimination for these two teams.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is a do or die best of 5. Winner goes on to play the lowest seed from the other 2 matchups. And speaking of those, let's take a look at the first matchup. First seed versus 4th seed. It is G2 versus Schalke 04. Gentlemen, we're in another situation where it's feeling on paper a little one-sided. I don't think it would matter a ton what name was drawn across the side from G2, but I think of the teams that they could have drawn, Schalke was definitely, of the top 4, Schalke, it does look like the weakest team right now. And while they did good on them for finishing 4th, those tiebreaker rules, this is going to be tough.
It's going to be tough. I think that the biggest... I mean, you always have the arguments where it's like, Schalke are the Kingslayers. They always beat G2 and nice.
Important things to note before we begin. Broken Blade did solo kill Wonder in a counter matchup as Aatrox into the Kled, and he monstered that entire game and was unstoppable, murdered absolutely everybody. So they have done it.
Yeah. The problem is G2 is G2. So when I say that, I mean the biggest thing that I think of G2 is flexibility. Like, they're so versatile. They can do whatever they want, especially in a best of 5. In a best of 1, yes, you might catch them off guard, but when it comes to best of 5s, they're adapting and they're changing as the series progresses. Whereas most teams are very stale. You can see their play style is quite obvious. And I think if you look at the progression of Schalke throughout spring, they had these really good drafts with teamfight comps that had clear win conditions of like playing front to back with big AoE spells, things like Hecarim and stuff like this. And then halfway through the split, they started trying to play Tristan and Nidalee comps, which are very hard to execute. Single target damage, prio lanes moving to sides, which they didn't do too well on. And then they went back to sort of a teamfight-esque style with things like Senna and stuff. So I think Schalke have found, if I look at Schalke's whole split, I think that Schalke have found success on teamfight comps, but G2 have found success on everything. So it's so hard to draft against a team when you have one playstyle and they have every playstyle. So I think that's where Schalke are going to fumble. The drafts will be quite difficult for them, I think.
Yeah, I think so I'll do my best to set up everything that Schalke have going for them. And I'll preface this by again saying G2 are going to 3-0. But this is everything Schalke have for them. All right? Kingslayers. Boom. Nailed it. Right off the top. You love
narrative.
Streaky
You're an
team.
insanely good narrative.
What a streaky team, right? You know, you're winning all your games in a row, then you're losing all your games, and they won their last 4 games in a row. Like, what's to stop them now? Maybe a 2-week break, maybe facing G2. We'll see. Now for the real things, though, like legitimately, like I was very impressed with like their drafting at the end of the split. Like, obviously, the game against Excel is kind of an outlier there, but just like genius level setup. To come in with the super global comp, the super scaling comp, the kill Patrick and auto win the game comp versus Excel. That's great. Can't do the same thing against G2, but I'm curious to see what they come up with in draft. And the other thing is that they started relying a whole lot more on Broken Blade as like a carry threat. And by this, it's like not just the picks of like the Urgot, the Fiora, like these things that can like pop off a ton towards the top side. But they also changed how they drafted in mid and bot lane and started introducing like second supports with like Seraphine bot lane for Neon. And this comes from a player that played like for the first half of the season, I think he played only Kai'Sa.
Yeah, he played,
like just a complete Kai'Sa one trick. And now they're playing like Seraphine in bot lane, Seraphine in mid lane to try and like play a more supportive style towards Broken Blade in the top lane and unlocking him not only to, you know, take over side lanes, but also then to be a legitimate team fight threat as well. And I think that these directions helped Schalke so much at the end of the season.
Well, and this ties in nicely to what we talked about in the patch segment earlier, which is that there is potentially, and a lot of this is speculation because we're not scrimming on this patch. We don't scrim.
Casters should start scrimming
Casters should start scrimming teams. That's great practice for both sides, for sure. Maybe we should just watch the scrims. Maybe that's the better use of everyone's time.
No, we're good enough, Caedrel.
Sharper champions is what you called them, but split pushers. And this is, as long as we've known Broken Blade, he's looked very good on these champions. And while he had a lot of, I'll say, respectable Gnar games on Schalke this season, usually doing fine in his individual lane matchup. You know, maybe not the flashiest games, but like solid individually. It was the Aatroxes that looked better. That Urgot game looked monstrous. So the patch shift potentially does help Schalke. And I think it is big what you guys talked about. The variability that we saw from Schalke in the final weeks is the biggest change that will be a positive for them here. Because up until the Broken Blade Urgot games, up until kind of the final game where we saw the really focused, you know, seek and destroy Nocturne Karthus composition, I was worried that Schalke were a team that figured out one thing that works for them, and they did nothing else. Because you brought up the Nidalee Tristana games. I'm looking at the Senna Tahm Kench games, but there's a lot of tape over the season before that final week that would lead you to believe that like Schalke tried to branch out, and it just failed miserably.
But I think that you're actually correct. I think maybe I was overlooking things. Things like the Seraphine mid and bot, like you said. There's actually flexibility there. Even things like the Karma top that Broken Blade was playing. So this team has shown that they can play supportive champs in different roles, even tanks top, things like the Shen. But I think that the jungle role, I think that Gilius has found the most success on things like Hecarim and in the Karthus game. So I think that's easily shut down. But I think you're definitely right in saying that they have flexibility across the board. Not so much flexibility in terms of early game strengths, still more towards scaling with things like Seraphine, Karma, shielding comps for Neon and for Ryze on Abbedagge and Ryze. So I think that there is flexibility in terms of the scaling aspects, in terms of the more teamfight aspects, but I think that the core concept's still there, that they're still playing towards teamfight and trying to counter big lanes to the point that when they group up, they have small advantages.
Well, I also think it's fair not to be totally convinced by a final week of games where they played against, frankly, pretty one-dimensional teams. Like that Excel comp mostly worked so well because Excel are so hyper-reliant on Patrick. And as you already mentioned, Ender, that's not going to work against G2. Like if you one-shot Reckless every team fight, like that's good. Don't get me wrong. Reckless is a big contributor, but like there's gaps.
There's
Wanderer. there's Yankos. And it's like maybe you can win a team fight like that.
Or you don't do that in order at your Nexus.
There's like split pushing against G2. Good luck.
Yeah,
like
good luck.
Like has not gone well for most teams.
Where you have to play perfect. Good luck.
And there's small inklings helping Schalke in a way that the patch discussion we just had, saying that Renekton Gnar kind of not out, but they're a little bit weaker. And then I think that's not something I would attribute Broken Blade to too much. I think he had a really horrible Renekton weekend where I think he was like 0-11-1 or something.
Yeah,
where
it was really
he
rough.
had like this mid jungle that needs to play towards top, but he never got any resources. So I think the things like the Camille, the Fiora, the Jax can be quite strong if these champions are out, especially if you're against tanks. So Broken Blade has the advantage there, the supportive tops, the Seraphine, Flex, the Hecarim. I think these are picks that will work for Schalke. I think that G2, I think, will win the Series 3-0, like Ender said, but G2 need to make sure that they're careful here, make sure they take away the things that Schalke are good at, things like the TF, the Rise, maybe Seraphine, maybe things like the Hecarim as well, and then just draft accordingly. And I think that G2 shouldn't find too much of a problem, but there is still things that Schalke are having success on. You need to make sure that you respect that.
Yeah, and I think that having the week off, having 2 weeks to prep for the series is great for Schalke, because ultimately what I'm looking for from this team is to come in with, if we only get 3 games, 3 very specific different looks.
Yeah.
Because I think that from what I've seen from the drafting, from being able to play these support comps, the Excel game, obviously, like I want to see like what is their way to break G2, and I want them to have a couple of different ideas and see, hey, maybe they can take a game. Like if they come up with something that's really solid there, and if they can execute on it, that is ultimately what I think success looks like for Schalke in this match.
For sure. And it's also important to note that unlike the Fnatic SK game, this is not an elimination match. Now, if Schalke lose, they are the lowest seed in the upper bracket, so they're guaranteed to go in the first round up against the winner of Fnatic versus SK, but they will get another chance. So, if they can show up, if they can figure out something that works, it might, even if it doesn't work against G2, if they go, okay, the concept is good, we need to work on the execution, or like maybe G2 is just too G2 for this to work against G2. G2's an everything. It's an adjective, it's a noun, it's everything. Maybe they can use that
G2'd
against the winner of Fnatic versus SK, which is also really big, because beating G2 is a monumental task for any team. But if you can make the rundown through the lower bracket, that would be incredible. That's still something that Schalke can be proud of at the split. And they have a second chance. It's not all done. If you are a Schalke fan, it's not all done just because you got drawn into G2, which is super nice for the team.
Yeah, and I think that gives them more room for experimentation, just try to test some limits, against G2. And I think that maybe Schalke can take a game where G2 disrespects in a way. I think BB's like so good at GP, like I think he's 100% winning on Gangplank, and then they think like, let's just give him Gangplank and let's just play like Lucian top into it, and all of a sudden your Lucian tops even or behind, and then the game just falls apart because G2's comp, like even with the things like the Rumble comp that they had with the Jace, these comps, I don't think they'll do it in a best of 5. It was fun to do it in best of 1s, but if they did draft something like this, I think Schalke might be able to pick up a win. But yeah, it's going to be hard for them, but like you said, they're going to fall into the lower bracket. It's not going to be the end of the world for them. They're probably going to be against maybe things like Fnatic perhaps, and then they have to fight their way back, which historically is not a bad thing. I think, am I right in saying that G2 actually lost in the upper bracket and they fell down and then they won the split?
G2 have lost twice
in the upper bracket.
Last year, because they lost to Mad Lions, and then in spring, and then they lost to Fnatic in summer.
Yeah, so the lower bracket's a pretty cool place to be in.
It's good if you want that. That means
If
a high pressure
G2.
place. Yeah, if you win, it's a good place to be because you get more best of 5 practice and experience. If you lose, you go home.
Not sure that logical.
Yeah, guys, I want to be in the losers bracket right now. I lived.
Backs
if it's
against
not
the wall,
eliminate,
more best of 5s, it makes you stronger, right?
Mom spaghetti, baby.
Mom
Let's
spaghetti.
go. Yeah, we'll see. Again, so Ender, you're predicting
jungle's
3-0.
heavy.
Wait, what did he say?
Newsweek jungle's heavy.
Okay,
Dude, the flame. Fun fact, Gillies and Tinks are the only junglers in the top 6 who are behind their opponents in XP and gold on average. So,
Bruh.
fun facts.
Thanks. Love me some quick
Stats. That's
quick
what
facts.
it is. All right. This will be actually the first time G2 has played Schalke in a best of 5 in the LEC era. So it's 2019, 2020, 2021. This is the first chance. So we'll see how it goes. Next up, the final match. I would argue the hypest match because it has the potential to be very close, even if it might be a bit Rogue favored. It is Rogue versus Mad. Important to note, though, that Rogue did 3-0 Splice in 2019 and 3-0'd Mad in 2020 summer. So, history and current form
It's a 9-0 weekend, Drake.
in favor of Rogue, but really 9-0.
I hope it's just a 10-game weekend, just so Ender doesn't get the 9-0 weekend. I just want one person to win the game.
I think looking at this matchup, right, Rogue right now, and we'll talk more about, I think at the end of this, I want to talk about Rogue versus G2, because I think everybody's thinking about Rogue versus G2. What does that look like? And maybe we get to see it next week. Maybe not, depending on if Mad shows up here. But Rogue versus Mad, in the past, it was a big clash of styles. It was Mad, the aggressive early game team. This is my narrative.
They're both rookie
We
squads.
always get narratives.
Rookie squads, early game versus the calm, controlled late game. But Larson, aka the Ginger God, aka the Teamfight King, AKA the Jungle King because he wore a tiger shirt that one time.
AKA the Emperor of
AKA
Shurima.
the Emperor, the literal Emperor of Shurima.
The Junior God.
Can kind of do it all now. He is not the quirky one trick that he maybe started out as in the beginning of his career. You know,
I refuse to accept that he was ever a Corky one trick.
well, he played Corky like 6 games, whatever. It's old. He's good. He's really insane now. And I just like Humanoid has been doing all right. You know, I think Humanoid is, when we look at mid laners, he's always in that conversation for top mid laners. But it's like it is Larson contesting Caps.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like that's it. If you've ever seen Afro Samurai, great anime by the way. There's the number 1 killer. That's Caps. No one can challenge him except for the number 2 killer. That's Larson. Anyone can challenge Larson. So this is Humanoid's chance to upset the tables. He can take that headband away. He can fight. You guys don't watch the show, so this entire thing is being lost.
Really
but I hope someone in the chat can get
the
it.
plot here.
Bottom line is
Narrative.
in order to bottom line is Larson right now is the only man looking to challenge the GOAT. And maybe Humanoid can take that right away from him. But between that and the fact that Inspired is playing like an absolute monster, looking like the best jungler in the league, even though Elyoya has looked really good. Odoamne's also good. Their bot lane's good. Hansama Trimby's a good lane. Like maybe you look at Trimby and go, okay, maybe he struggles on stage. But even if he struggles on stage, it's like they're still such a good team.
The other 4 are going to pop up anyway.
The most disturbing thing about this match is I think if you look at...
Is my headband narrative?
Well, that's messed up. But like I see like in terms of like individual matchups, I see the largest gaps actually in top lane and in bot lane, and yet Rogue's best players are their jungle and mid lane. So
yeah,
I'm trying to find an angle here for Mad Lions, and I'm really not seeing it.
But I think if you look at the last time these 2 teams faced each other, the only way that Rogue won was 1 shockwave into a Baron into a comeback.
That
Mad
is
Lions
true.
were winning the game. They had Ocean Soul, I think it was.
Yeah.
And they were set to win the game. But Mad Lions just always throw games. Even against Misfits, they were winning. Just throw, make mistakes, get caught, lose a team fight. 1 person gets picked off. SK, 1 Hex Flash, 2 people die. They lose Baron. Like,
but
Mad Lions win games, but then they lose games. You know?
But that's a really important point, and that's I think if you want to look at a game
Better than Afro Samurai.
Okay, thanks.
Guys, it's great. You have to watch Afro Samurai. The soundtrack's incredible. Anyway. Now I'm just upset that you don't want to watch my show. That's fine. I think it is really good to talk about that game. I think that is a really important thing to consider because we have seen the game be in Mad Lions' hand. It not end up being this absolute like individual showcase of people being individually outclassed, but it actually being team decisions that stop Mad Lions from winning the game. And I think if you're a Mad fan, that's what you want to look at and hold on to hope for. Now, we can expect that Rogue will clean up their early game, that they won't get put in that situation again. But the bigger thing for me is like, can Mad clean up that mid game? Because this is not the first time that we've talked about the Mad Lions roster. And it was last year more that we talked about this, where it was like the early game. They are so good. The mid game, they don't know what they're doing. And that's obviously a bit of an exaggeration. They clearly know what they're doing, but they do make a lot of mistakes. And that's the kind of thing that like a team like Rogue will absolutely just obliterate you, even if they're down 3-4K gold, because the Orianna Shockwave, the 8 health Aatrox going back to full health, whatever part of that stood out the most to you, can happen.
Yeah, no, I think that it sort of goes both ways, right? Because obviously, like if Mad Lions are clumsy in the way that they close out their games, Rogue are obviously going to punish that. But we've also seen like the strongest Rogue version is the very controlled game state from Rogue, and I think it's very hard for most teams to contest them. I think if Rogue were to ever beat a G2, it would be in a style like that. But Mad Lions, what they're best at is when it does get a little scrappier, and this has been a long thing for them, even before this current iteration of the roster has existed. This has been largely the way the team plays. So I think that when we see Mad Lions like have a good game against Rogue, it will come down to that a lot. But I in a full best of 5, I see this being more problematic. Like, it would not surprise me. I know I said 9-0, but like a game like Mad Lions to win a game is not like super shocking, right? I don't think like there's a huge divide between these two teams in terms of overall skill. But what I do value most in Rogue is the consistency. And I think they can show multiple different styles. I think over the course of the split, they did show that they could play, faster tempo games, more involved.
1-3. They played 1-3-1 compositions.
Yeah, but they can play like the Nidalee and stuff for Inspired as well. The heavy pressure early game, which I think is actually one of their best looks from Inspired as well. So I think that people are going to think back to the G2 game when G2 like obliterated them early on. It was like, oh, this team, they can't play early. But I don't think that's legitimately true. I think that Rogue are actually a very well-rounded team with a lot of different ways they can win the game.
Yeah, I think the way they lost that game was just miscommunication around mid-jungle, Larson fell behind.
Yeah.
But I think, especially like going back to Ender's point, where it's like mid jungle is the strongest part of Rogue, whereas he thinks that the gap is biggest in top and bot. I mean, you even saw that in the Rogue Mad Lions game, where it's like Odoamne is playing Aatrox, and he's just quietly farming up. All of a sudden, his team's losing the game, but he has a shutdown because he's up like 50 CS on Aatrox, just catching every side wave, and that's where you see the gaps in a sense. Yes, Armut was grouping a lot to get team fights going, but I think Mad Lions' way of drafting as well was also pretty fine. I mean, they had a plan with the Ahri pick into the Orianna. It worked. They got an early game lead. Rogue get a team fight. The game's won. So I think Mad Lions might be able to win a game. I think this is the one series where I look at it and I think that Mad Lions have a chance to win a game, but I still think that Rogue are just too good.
I think we can go full 5 because I think there are a lot of intangibles when it comes into this match, especially because Mad are one of the teams that has a history of struggling to adapt to stage, but also Mad are one of the teams that has a history of really mixing it up when a new patch comes in. Now, admittedly, with this new Rogue lineup, they're also a team that has shown us more looks, that has looked more fresh. Like, this is a team I would also expect if there is some new pick that's being picked up for Rogue to grab it as well. Wouldn't have said the same thing last year. But for Mad, I think there's always a lot of room to get creative. And so I would expect at minimum 3-1. And maybe that's too bold. Maybe I'm undercutting Rogue here a little bit because they have just been so good over the course of the regular season. But I think this could very reasonably be a 5-game series. But a lot of it hinges on Mad Lions mid-game. And I think some kind of creativity in the draft, some kind of pick that catches Rogue off guard. Because I do think Rogue is a definitively better team. But I think Mad are a team with enough creativity and clearly have the capacity to build these leads that they can, and I would say should get at least a single game.
But are they going to throw them is the question.
That's the thing. That's why I'm saying 3-1 is reasonable, but I can't confidently say 5. I can't confidently say a Mad Lions win because
ultimately, like, and I say this again with this disclaimer, like I keep saying I know, but like this weekend could in theory be very volatile for a lot of different reasons. Like it's 2 weeks again between that, right? And I think it was even Rogue last summer where like farming junglers were not played at all in the LEC, and then we roll into playoffs and Inspired is just spam locking in Hecarim and just crushing with it. And then even a team like G2 took 2 weeks before they realized, wait, this is actually kind of OP. So like if there are to be meta changes, like it's possible one team just comes in with a sweet read because we've had a bit of a break, but also like returning to stage, everything, like there's so many different variables outside of gameplay that can make it volatile. But I don't care about any of those.
And that's the cool
on
thing.
Paper. I know.
That's the cool thing about meta reads. They take so long to develop where teams are either hesitant to the point where they're like, nah, that's actually bad. We're going to stick to what's actually good. And other teams are like, well, we've tested this and it's pretty good. And then also the biggest difference comes from who you're scrimming, right? So if I'm Rogue and I'm playing against Mad Lions and I'm scrimming G2, for example, and Mad Lions is scrimming Fnatic, then both of these teams will have different playstyles coming into the weekend because they've scrimmed each other and they think that this style is broken versus this style. And then both of them try and figure out what the meta picks are. So you'll see overlaps in where both teams come to the same conclusion, but you'll also see, like you said, where it's last year, where some teams are playing farming junglers, some teams aren't, because their scrim opponents, they find success against it, or they don't, and then they just make a decision like that.
Well, we don't know how scrims are blocked out, right? Because there's a world where if I'm Rogue or G2, I'm like, scrims? Just like scrim each other. And that's really nice because you're the two best teams in the league, and you guys get like probably the best practice that way. But it's also bad if, let's say, your players aren't experimenting a lot and you guys are all really convinced, let's say, that like Lilia nerfs are meaningless, she's still a great champion, we're going to play Lilia every game, and then you come in and someone has this like crazy counter for Lilia that you never saw coming.
You have to think about the who to scrim meta as well, because you're never going to scrim against like the opponent you're facing next, right? So like G2 is not going to be playing Schalke, but then does G2 want to play Rogue that they're probably playing next week and then probably again in a finals matchup? I don't know, maybe we'll see.
Depends how you buy the practice.
It's possible. It's possible, because you also then, like, if you are playing against the team that you're probably playing in like the most crucial matchups, how much are you willing to show? Because we are really close to that as well. So it's possible we develop like small little echo chambers where it's like, oh, if G2 are playing a lot of Fnatic and SK, maybe that series looks pretty similar. Maybe we get a hint of what G2 are going to try to play.
And you see it a little bit, and like you can see it in pick ban priority even week to week in the LEC, because there will be like new picks that come out, whether it's like the tank Hecarim or teams that are really prioritizing the Senna Tom Kench, and then like two or three teams in a day will all just first rotation to Senna Tom Kench, and you're like, yeah, I wonder who you were scrimming.
Yeah, they were scrimming each other, exactly. And then the other teams weren't probably even aware of the picks, They were like, wait, what? This is broken. And they're a week behind. And all of a sudden, well, the Senna Tom Kench is bad. Actually, we're a week ahead. You're just inting yourselves. Win-win for me.
So this is where we get the spice, is coming up with this on the spot with no insight whatsoever. G2 probably want to play Mad Lions a lot, right? G2 probably experimenting with Mad Lions a lot. Mad Lions might have a little spice coming in against Rogue.
Sick. Possible. But going back to the matchup, I think top and bottom, the gaps. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
every time I see Odoamne stats, I'm mind blown. Lowest jungle proximity, highest CS differential. Sure, man.
He's
that
insane.
king.
And let me do this for you because we're doing like the anime references, right? So Horimiya, which you have to watch, everyone has to watch. Great show. Odoamne is like the main, the male lead from that, right? He's got the long hair. He's wearing glasses. Like from the outside, doesn't look like he's that attractive of a guy. He's just some top laner locking in tanks. Like it's crazy.
Where's this
And
going?
then all of a
We're
sudden,
just gonna let him
we
finish.
roll into the team fights. Man's cut his hair. You realize he's got like 18 different earrings. He's got tats. The man is he's hot.
I got it.
He's hot in
It's
the team
Disney.
fights,
It's like the slightly sexist Disney glow ups from
It's just a
early era
complete
Princess
glow up.
movies where they like
Exactly.
Speaking of
take off
haircuts,
their
Ender.
glasses and get a haircut.
Dude, I need a haircut so bad. Speaking of piercings,
Ooh, double dangle,
Double
We
dangle.
like, perhaps. But I think again, it is while we are talking about all the different ways in which our predictions can be upset, this isn't to say like these aren't to be cop outs, but just to be aware that playoffs is always a big shift, that there can be dramatic turns. It is a testament to how strong each of the winning teams are in their respective matchups that we are digging deep to find these reasons. Now, I think everything, like we start to see Schalke versus Fnatic, as it moves on, maybe Fnatic or Schalke versus a Mad. That's when we get these maybe closer, more tense series. But right now, at the top of the table, like unlucky round one draw, every match
Yeah.
I think is just going to be blasting.
on paper, I think this match, like you're saying, blasting. I think next week gets really
Very
good.
crazy.
But this week, with all the external variables, has potential to be very against our expectations.
Yeah.
I would say.
I think my dark horse is Mad Lions, actually. Even last year, Mad Lions just came out of nowhere. And it's so hard to say, like, oh, well, G2's just going to 3-0. Fnatic's going to 3-0 SK. Because even last year, it's like Mad Lions just beat G2 in
Yeah.
a best of 5. It's like, sorry, what?
And Elyoya is good. We've agreed that their roster across the board is upgraded. And as much as we feel like there's, a bot difference on Rogue's side, Carzzy and Kaiser are good. Like Carzzy and Kaiser are very good bot
Very
lane.
good.
It's just been the performance this season just has not been there. So
sure.
I can't in good faith be like, this is the series where they show up. But like Kaiser was what Treats has been this last year. He was the only support to start contesting, maybe alongside Vander, the Hylissang's, and Mickey X's of the world. So that P word, as much as I hate it, the potential is there for Mad Lions. So I think you're right. That's the dark horse. Everything else, like, I don't know. I haven't seen enough from Schalke to believe that Schalke can turn it around. I haven't seen enough from SK to say that they can turn it around. Of course, yes, there's a world where it can happen. 2 weeks is a long time, but it's not there for me.
Yeah.
All right.
I just want to see what people have been scrimming with. I want to see some
I
crazy.
really hope there's some spice.
There will be. Schalke will have spice.
Hot
Mad
Wings
Lions
level
will have
spice.
Those are the two spice teams to look out for.
I'm just thinking about the Fnatic Spice Girls composition. All right, so let's get some just final predictions. Ender, are you still 3-0 across the board?
9-0.
9-0 across the board. Caedrel, Fnatic versus SK,
3-0.
G2 versus Schalke,
3-0.
Rogue versus Mad.
3-1.
Hey, there
I
we
just
go.
won one
got
win.
the same.
I just won one win, so it's 10.
3 win. Okay, well we're
Watch it be
aligned.
Schalke. That's the only team to win a game.
Maybe, yeah.
You guys
Been
were
the
talking
series.
beforehand, and I don't want to do this bet on Euphoria, but there is room for you to do it on your personal streams, and I like giving you guys the stream clout when you guys come on the show. Do you guys want to do the thing?
Are we doing this?
It would be
Yeah.
Rogue versus Mad.
Rogue versus Mad.
Rogue versus Mad.
So wait, what's the bet? Well, not what's the bet?
Oh, if it's 3-0 or 3-1.
3-0,
okay.
3-1.
And then if it's 3-2, we both have to do it.
Okay. And what if Mad Lions win?
Then you're wrong.
Yeah,
you're
then-
both wrong.
then we still have
you
to
still
both
both have
do
to
it.
do
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Okay, so I think the bet involves wearing cat ears and
Yeah. And
You
Role
have to
playing.
be a cat girl on stream for how long? 2 games? 1 game? You
I-
guys
just
can't
the
do it
whole
for an entire. It's
what, you
such
can't-
bad
the whole
content.
but
Bro,
I
I'm
stream-
sorry.
I think it's
for
great
like 8
content.
hours.
As people who watch your streams after 1 game, I do not want to hear you say nya or uwu anymore.
Until
Oh, well.
chat tells us to stop.
I
How
think-
about
I think
that?
You can take a poll after every game.
I think
to see
one,
if
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
keep
yeah.
going.
one full game.
No, chat can vote to keep
Chat
it
can
going.
vote.
Okay.
That's the.
I
That's
think
good.
I think the prop is here in the studio, right? The little ears.
You can
Yeah,
take
yeah.
one. for
But I
sure. You
think
just gotta bring
we'll
them
have to do a little like black makeup on the nose and then the whiskers.
back. The whiskers
right?
for sure.
Yeah.
Whiskers for sure. Are you good?
Yeah,
You're
I'm
good?
Yeah, I'm down.
All right.
What's Euphoria without some kind of bet?
Yeah.
You gotta
This is
you'll
high
love to
stakes.
see
This
it.
is way better than fish sauce.
We'll keep you posted. Maybe we'll add a clip of it in. That's twitch.tv/Caedrel, twitch.tv/Endercast.
Yep. Not Ender Cats.
Endercast.
Okay, dude.
Endercast.
We may have
I'll
to
be
name change.
Caedrel and you'll be Ender Cats.
That's actually
That's
so
good, right?
That's so
Okay.
good.
All right, this has been
And we can only
season
play Nidalee Yumi.
Sure, as long as chat's cool. I don't care. If you guys want to see them dress up as cats, you need to be watching Rogue versus Mad this weekend to see who comes out on top. If it is a 3-0, Ender will have won the bet. If it is a 3-1, Caedrel will have won the bet. If it's anything else, they both will have lost.
Let me hear your meow.
Yeah. Oh man, this is why I didn't want this. They just can't do this anymore. That said, our match of the week to watch. Yes, Rogue vs. Mad is hype, but you need to be watching Fnatic vs. SK. Hashtag no bias, but we're casting it. All three of us together.
boys.
So if
The
you want more of
boys.
this, if you want the boys, if you want to hear what we have to say about that thrilling match,
Is that our
I have a
name?
cool graphic coming for it.
the
Don't worry.
boys? Yeah.
I have a
think
cool
we're the
graphic coming.
boys.
We can Photoshop the Amazon original series. I'm just shouting out random stuff now. Jeff
Plug it
Bezos,
in.
call me. Let me get that Amazon
No, I was thinking
money.
the Hot Fuzz one where it's me and you and then Ender's little face in the background. With the fire behind us.
All right. Well,
Coming
we'll
to a
figure that
playoffs
out.
near you.
Thank you to everyone who submitted questions across. We only asked a few questions directly, but we used so many of them to inspire what we wanted to talk about today. This has been Season 7, Episode 10 of Euphoria. We'll be back next week with more guests coming in. We'll also be talking more about the playoffs matchups coming up and maybe some other topics as well. So be sure to tune in for that. Otherwise, have a fantastic weekend, and we'll see you guys for round 1 of playoffs.
Bye-bye.
Meow.